Latin America is a popular place to move, particularly for North Americans who want proximity to their home country and their time zone, who want the opportunity to get citizenship, and who want a certain amount of economic freedom. But one of the bigger problems with a number of Latin American countries is taxes. And one of my favorite newsletters, Latino Metrics, recently asked, why do we have such a bad reputation when it comes to taxes? Quoting a report that says 11 countries in Latin America are actually so-called tax hells. Today, I'm going to tell you how to stay out of tax hell in Latin America. It's true. Among the worst tax hells in the world, according to the 1841 Foundation, a majority of those are in Latin America. What's the criteria for a tax hell? They call it rule of law, property rights, fiscal burden, public debt, and inflation. Taken together, as they say, poor performance in these means that entrepreneurs have a harder time starting a business or scaling up, while investors may be more cautious about approaching a given country. Now, we've talked about some countries in the region that are stepping up and working to improve. El Salvador is going in the right direction. Argentina with the new president. Paraguay, one of the countries in South America that has generally leaned more right-wing, pro-business, even as some of the other countries are left-wing. Now, here's the issue I take with this tax hell definition before we get into which countries I think are tax hells and which are more of tax havens that you can move to, is that some of these factors don't impact a nomad capitalist in where you want to go. No doubt, a fiscal burden is eventually going to be a problem. You look at some of the Western countries, the legacy brand countries that have outrageous amounts of debt. You say, this is a ticking time bomb. They're going to have to take some pretty nasty measures in the future. And so if you're looking for a place to live temporarily, I'm not sure that the fiscal burden matters that much if you're willing to move out if something goes wrong with high debt levels. But for longer term, outlooks, obviously more healthy debt levels are better. It's hard to find more indebted countries than some of those in the West. Property rights, that's a cultural issue that does matter. You may say, hey, if I'm not planning on buying property in this place, I just want to go down and rent. That may not matter as much to me. I have a home in Colombia. It's a very, very, very small percentage of my net worth. If it were taken away, I'd of course be pretty upset. I don't think that's going to happen. Do I factor a high risk in when I make that purchase? No, I don't. But rule of law, property rights, these things are all important. I think that if you're living in a place, as Doug Casey told us at our live event, Nomad Capitalist Live before, he said, I live in Argentina and I'm this white guy that they let live out in the wine country and they just leave me alone. And they don't look at me as the kind of person they want to come after. And so I do think that some countries, such as in Malaysia, where we host Nomad Capitalist Live this year, they are more likely, okay, we're going to leave you alone. And I think that, tax hell for someone who is from a country and lives there and has all their eggs in one basket is different from someone who is diversifying themselves around the world. If you're moving to Latin America, your major banking should not move to Latin America. You want that somewhere else. You may get citizenship in Latin America, but if you need a second citizenship now, you're probably going to get that from somewhere else. So I see Latin America as being more palatable in that regard. I spend some time in Colombia. I have a home. I have a permanent residence permit. But the qualifications for me to be a taxpayer there are much higher than the amount of time I would ever spend there. And so when people say, aren't you worried about Colombia's high taxes? No, because I'm not subject to them. I spend as much time per year as a tourist on a long holiday. I have the diversification. I have the opportunity to go there, and it's helped us find people to hire in Colombia, separate from my living there. It's opened up business opportunities for us in South America, my being there, my having that presence, just even having it in my mind. But I'm not there long enough to make that my tax home. And so you want to keep that in mind. So let's go through what are the tax hells. Some of the tax hells include Venezuela. This report done before the new president in Argentina. So Argentina is up there. Nicaragua is there. Bolivia is there. Probably the country with the least opportunities for planting flags in all of South America, Bolivia. We've looked at our R&D team and myself have looked at Bolivia from every which way. I know one guy who lives there and he kind of enjoys it. If you want to live there, it's pretty off the radar. Not many opportunities for citizenship, banking, anything else. Haiti in the Caribbean, of course. Honduras is on there. I would kind of push back on that just from the tax rate perspective. And Suriname is on there, among a number of Eastern European countries like Russia and Ukraine, interestingly enough, and Bosnia. a place where I had a hell of a time trying to open a bank account. Argentina for sure has been an issue. Now, the difference between tax hell and Argentina is I think a lot of people in Argentina have worked their way around the system for years because it's been a bad system for so many years. That's why you've seen this concept of the tax holiday in a country like that, where it's like, all right, please bring your money back because we don't have the heavy hand to go and find it. It's not something that I'm comfortable doing. I am the goody two-shoes, and I don't want to be playing those games. But I don't think that someone in Argentina is quite as concerned about being in tax hell. I think they've got other issues down there. Those are the tax hells. Here's where you can go in Latin America, and you've got good taxes. Uruguay is one of our team's favorites. Not only is it a place that if you're worried about the fur flying in many places around the world, you're pretty far down there. Not only if you're committed to living there full time, is it a good passport to get in as few as 3 years, but you can live for either 11 years tax-free, essentially. Now, you're not going to move your company to Uruguay. You're going to continue to have your assets and your business around the world, but they will let you live there 10 plus 1 years tax-free. Or you can just say, hey, I'll pay 7% on those incomes overseas, and I'll do that forever. So 11 years tax-free sounds pretty good to me. Uruguay does that. That's the cool thing about Latin America. You can live in Asia. They've got a number of tax-friendly countries, specifically in Southeast Asia. They're not going to give you citizenship. So the tax policies may be a little bit easier there, but you're going to have to generally invest more to get into those countries from an immigration perspective, whereas Latin American countries are pretty open. Show us you have income, show us a little bit of money, you can come in. The investment required is less. Uruguay has those programs. They're at the higher end of how much you need to show that you have in terms of income, for example. But 11 years tax-free. Now, you do need to get in that deal, you want to have a home, and you want to commit in some ways to Uruguay from a time perspective and from a housing perspective. But if you're willing to do that, 11 years tax-free. And it's one of the higher, quality living places in Latin America. Not super exciting from my perspective, but not everybody wants super exciting. Panama is a country with a territorial tax regime. Now, there's different versions of territorial. I started talking about territorial tax as what I would say one of the 4 major tax systems, and I would expand that now to include kind of offshoots like non-dom and lump sum, which has kind of become popularized since I was talking about this. I see a lot of people talking about territorial tax now. I don't think everyone entirely understands that there are some considerations in territorial tax. In some cases, a country with territorial tax might have permanent establishment rules, but no controlled foreign corporation rules. And so what that would mean is your company, just by you controlling it, is not going to be taxed. But if you're working there, doing certain things, we may tax your efforts in the company. And there's different ways of looking at that. And so just because a country is territorial doesn't mean it's zero. You want to evaluate what it is that, if you have a business, you're doing in that business, what your contribution to the company is. Do we need to segregate you into a separate staffing company, something like that? And every country is a little bit different. So territorial tax does not mean zero tax. What it means is foreign source income is not taxed. That would generally mean if your company's incorporated somewhere else, that money is not taxed. Some countries have different rules on remittance. So Thailand is a territorial tax regime, but now they're imposing some tax on remittances, which gives you kind of a non-dom-like level of control. But anyway, there's always considerations to take in mind. That's what we help our clients figure out, not just to look at very basic stuff and make broad assumptions, as I think sadly many people do, but to get down into the nitty-gritty and create a true holistic plan. nomadcapitalist.com/apply if you want to work with, I think, the best team in the industry. And we know that, by the way, because people come to us from other companies in the industry, and our hire rate of them is very, very low, and they only know one piece of the puzzle. They know passports, for example. And we just say, I think we have the best team in the industry. Anyway, Panama, territorial country. You can live there, and you can essentially live with proper structuring tax-free in Central America. Get a citizenship? I would argue probably not. Can you apply? Sure. Are you going to get it? I don't think so. Costa Rica, territorial tax regime. There's been some back and forth over the last 3 years or so about whether they would change that on at least one occasion, I think 2. But Costa Rica is one of those countries where, okay, if you're working actively in your company, you might want some structuring for that. If you are just owning a company, or if you have passive investments, it's pretty straightforward. So essentially in Panama or Costa Rica, you could live With proper structuring, essentially at zero tax, their deal is make money here, pay here. Bring it in from somewhere else, don't pay here. And you can argue that makes sense. A country says, if we generate the economic incentive or the opportunity for you, we're going to take our pound of flesh for that. If you already have your money and you just want to come and live here and spend it and go to restaurants and buy stuff and buy real estate and have someone renovate your house and you're bringing money into our place, that's a luxury some of these countries can have. And that's why you can go where you're treated best. Nicaragua, more of an emerging country than Panama and Costa Rica, also a territorial system. And so that was a place that during the pandemic, some people wanted to go to because they were one of the more open places to go to. You could get in there. And it was tax-friendly plus open. Paraguay in South America has a territorial system. So what you're seeing is most of the territorial systems are kind of in southern South America. Guatemala has some tax kind of friendly stuff, but it's not as friendly as the others. But in South America, next to Uruguay, Paraguay has a territorial system. I think at one point there was some level of source-independent passive income tax, but I don't believe that exists anymore. So territorial tax in Paraguay, income tax rates are low if you're making money there, for example. So like personal income tax, I think goes up to 10%. A lot of people are going, I see Paraguay as kind of like the Georgia of South America for some reason. I don't think the banks are as advanced, but Paraguay is a country where you can go, and if you live there, it's a relatively fast track to citizenship if you want a decent passport. Paraguay and Uruguay have good passports. Uruguay is, I think, a more European, higher quality of life place to go. Paraguay is a bit more emerging, but it's a place where there are opportunities. I personally think that emerging Asia has more opportunities than emerging Latin America. I look at Latin America more as a lifestyle destination, but if you like that, I mean, the beautiful thing about Latin America is, for the most part, Spanish is spoken. If you can learn Spanish, if you speak Spanish, you can move around the different countries, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Ecuador, low enough tax rates. If you pay tax somewhere else, not as much on the tax-friendly radar, but it's not terrible. Mexico, not really a tax-friendly country. And if you get into their tax net, then getting out comes with some restrictions on where you go for a while. However, they have more of what's called a ties system. Honestly, one of the most confusing countries we've ever dealt with for figuring out who pays tax and who doesn't. And it really is kind of like touch and feel. So like owning a home, for example, is a problem. Becoming a citizen and owning a home is a bigger problem. The fewer ties you have, the easier it is to potentially, and again, this is not tax advice because it is kind of touch and feel and it's situation dependent. But yeah, ties-based system that looks at home ownership, potentially looks at your family, later economic ties as well. So depending on how you live, depending on what you have, Mexico could be a place, not tax-friendly, but it could be tax-friendly for you. And that's the key I always want you to take away from this. There are countries in Europe, when I say Ireland and Italy and Greece, have favorable tax regimes for foreigners. People say, what are you talking about? I live in Italy. This is an outrage. Of course, our taxes are through the roof. Right, but people who have not lived in your country or people who aren't deemed to be domiciled in the country can come and get a special deal for the same kind of reasons as the territorial system. As, hey, you're not from here or you haven't been here for a while. Your money is from somewhere else. Come here and spend your money, and you'll pay tax on the money that you bring into the country. So the European systems aren't quite as favorable as like a Latin America tax-friendly country. But the point is, there are places that if you look at the headline tax rates, they're high. But there may be incentives, there may be deals, there may be, as in the case of Uruguay, hey, for 11 years, don't pay us. After that, you can pay us, or you can pay us a low percentage now forever. So, there's always opportunities. What I would also add is I coined the term trifecta a number of years ago. I was in Bogota, Colombia. This is 7 years ago. And I said, you can split up your life into being in 3 countries, 4 months a year. For me, I like that because I could be in Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and I could enjoy the best of all worlds. Since then, I went to a modified trifecta where my presence in Latin America was a lot less than it was in the other places. You could modify it. But the added benefit, for me, it was the lifestyle that came first, but the added benefit was, in a lot of these countries, the rules to being a taxpayer are 6 months. That's not the case for more developed countries, where they have much more of a ties system. What do you have here that connects you to the country? But in a country like a Colombia, for example, generally a simple days test. And so if you're living there 4 months, you're not going to trigger the tax residence criteria. And so you could have a trifecta that only included Latin American countries if you just like living in Latin America. If you really like living in one country in particular, then that's fine. The ones I listed will be better if you want to keep your taxes low. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Argentina. I know El Salvador is talking about doing certain things in certain parts of the country for certain kinds of people. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do. And that's something that we're going to be talking about this year at Nomad Capitalist Live, both Argentina and El Salvador. But theoretically, these countries also say if you're not here full time or a majority of the time, then we're also not going to put you in the tax. That's one thing that you could do. But it's always nice to have some places in your wheelhouse where you know if I had to spend time here or if I wanted to spend time here and I became a tax resident, that I would be in a favorable position. And so those are a handful of countries that are not tax hells, but actually pretty tax friendly in Latin America, a region not known for that.